Captain Marvel was the perfect blend of humor, action, 90s nostalgia, and major contributions to the MCU. Let's go to Cobbs Corner. Welcome back to Cobbs Corner. I'm your host, Morgan Cobbs. Captain Marvel was Marvel's very first female superhero to get her own solo film, so let's just jump right into it. The film opens with our usual Marvel Studios title sequence, but this time all the moments from other MCU properties are replaced with photos and videos of the late, great Stan Lee. This was Marvel Studios' way of paying tribute to the man, the myth, the legend, who truly is the reason why we have a Marvel Cinematic Universe today, and dare I say, the reason why I even have a lot of the content that I've covered on this podcast we would not have without the late great Stan Lee. Captain Marvel was the very first Marvel film to be released after Stan Lee's death at the very old age, the grand age of 95. He was 95 years old when he died in November of 2018. Captain Marvel was the first film to come out after his death. This means that Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame, sadly, are the last two films that contain Stan Lee cameos. Like many films in Phase 3, this film opens with a flashback sequence. We see the main character, Carol Danvers, played by Brie Larson, caught in the middle of a battle between the Skrulls, a shape-shifting race which I'll talk about more in a minute, and the Kree. We then find out that this was a dream that Carol had, and she wakes up on the Kree home planet of Hala and spars with Jan Rog, played by Jude Law, a Kree commander. On Hala, Carol goes by the name Veers and has been told that her powers come from the Supreme Intelligence, an AI that pretty much runs the whole Kree civilization. No one is able to look upon the Supreme Intelligence in its raw form, and we do not see the Supreme Intelligence in its raw form in this film. Instead, the Supreme Intelligence takes the form of someone important in that Kree's life. In Veers' dream, she sees the woman who she sees when she communicates with the Supreme Intelligence, and she doesn't know who that is. The Kree have been at war with the Skrull civilization for a very long time. The Skrulls are aliens that can shapeshift into anything and anyone, down to their exact molecular structure. The Skrull expansion has threatened the Kree civilization for generations. Veers is sent on a rescue mission to a foreign planet to rescue a Kree spy that was sent there. On the team, we see Jimon Hansu reprising his role as Korath the Pursuer, and Lee Pace reprising his role as Ronan the Accuser, since this film takes place in the year 1995, which is 19 years before the first Guardians of the Galaxy, which took place in 2014. The team goes to rescue their spy, and they're ambushed by the Skrulls, who end up killing numerous members of the team and capturing Veers. Back on the Skrull ship, Veers is being suspended upside down in a contraption as the Skrulls search through her memory to figure out who she is. We see old memories of Veers as a child on Earth getting knocked down as a kid at Air Force training camp, and we even see a memory of her with whomever the woman is that she saw when she communed with the Supreme Intelligence. The Skrulls then find out that this woman is a doctor named Dr. Wendy Lawson. Just then, Veers wakes up and escapes her entrapment and eventually gets the braces covering her hands removed and uses her powers to the full extent. After stealing an escape pod, she crashes onto Earth, which the Kree refer to as Planet C-53. The year is 1995, and she crashes into a Blockbuster Video somewhere in downtown Los Angeles. Outside the Blockbuster, she sees a security guard, played by Barry Curtis, who is the actual security guard for Marvel Studios. Veers asks if he is in charge of security for this area, and she even mentions that she has a universal translator, a nice bit of world building that all of Marvel's extraterrestrial characters have their own universal speech translators. Veers asks where she can find communication equipment, and the guard points her in the direction of a payphone. As she is calling Jan Rog to inform her of her location, she is then interrupted by none other than Nick Fury, who is still a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent at this point and still has both of his eyes. Veers tells Fury how she is a member of the Kree Star Force, and she will be out of his way as soon as she finds and stops the Skrulls who have invaded Earth. We even see Agent Phil Coulson, who is still new to S.H.I.E.L.D. at this point. Veers follows one of the Skrulls onto the subway, and she punches someone who appears to everyone else to be an elderly woman, but is actually a Skrull disguising themselves as an elderly woman. A fight ensues, and the Skrull takes the form of someone else and escapes. We even get a cameo from Stan Lee as himself, reading the script of the movie Mallrats, which did come out in 1995 and starred the comedy duo Jason Mewes and Kevin Smith, aka Jay and Silent Bob, respectively. Meanwhile, Agents Fury and Coulson, they're driving and they're trying to chase down the train that Veers is on when it's revealed that the real Agent Coulson is still at the Blockbuster and that a Skrull disguising himself as Coulson is in the car with Fury. The two start fighting and Fury ends up killing the Skrull while he ends up with a cut just above his left eye, a foreshadowing of his eventual loss of said eye, which we will get to later on. After the Skrull that Veers was chasing down escapes her grasp and leaves behind what appears to be a glowing object which held her memory file, Veers examines the file. She sees a bar known as Poncho's Bar in the memory file and then goes to investigate. She finds an internet cafe and types in Poncho's Bar and then locates it on a physical map. Now, myself, as a member of Gen Z, as a member of Gen Z who was not alive in the 90s, I was born in 2001. I'm only 21 years old as of the recording of this podcast. This is a bit of 90s nostalgia that I can't really relate to since I wasn't alive in the 90s. I'm sure millennials remember pre-Y2K internet. And, to put things into perspective, I feel like the earliest version of Windows that I used was probably XP. I remember Windows XP. It's weird because I'm old enough to remember Windows XP. I'm old enough to remember when Blockbuster was still a thing. I got that last taste of the analog era and then witnessed the rise of streaming and the transition from analog to digital. And so I never had to use dial-up internet, and I don't think I've ever really had to go to an internet cafe. So I don't know what the struggles were of pre-Y2K internet, but I'm sure those of you millennials who are, some in your 30s and some maybe even in your 40s, I'm sure you all got a kick out of the 90s nostalgia. I'm sure. Veers finds the bar and sees a photo of an Air Force fighter jet in the bar and asks the bar owner where the photo was taken. Just then she is met by Fury, who, after some light banter with Veers, finally sits down and actually asks her about the Skrulls. Veers tells Fury how the Skrulls can shapeshift into literally anyone down to the DNA and can only recall recent memories. She then proceeds to ask Fury a list of questions that only he would know. Fury explains how he was born in Huntsville, Alabama, although he technically doesn't remember that. He joined the Army straight out of high school and left the Army with the rank of, I think it was full Burt Colonel. And after leaving the Army, he joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and began, being that it was during the Cold War era, he joined S.H.I.E.L.D., so he was stationed all over the world in numerous cities, namely Belfast, Bucharest, Belgrade, Budapest. He says how he likes the bees, he can make them rhyme. Budapest was mentioned by Hawkeye and Black Widow in the first Avengers film, and Budapest is a city that shows up in the Black Widow solo film, which I might review down the line. Bucharest is the same city where Bucky was hiding out during Captain America Civil War, like when he was framed for the murder of King T'Chaka. Like he was hiding out in Bucharest. Fury also mentions how if toast is cut diagonally, he cannot eat it. That's a bizarre fact that Carol really didn't need to know. There is a scene in Avengers Age of Ultron where we see Fury cutting bread. It is not toast. Shout out to Eric Voss on New Rockstars for analyzing that scene. But it is bread. It is not toast. All right. That Fury cuts diagonally. But yeah, if toast is cut diagonally, then Fury can't eat it. In order to prove that Veers is not a Skrull, Veers photon blasts the jukebox in the bar and mentions how Skrulls cannot do that. The two of them drive over to a restricted Air Force base in the desert, which was the site of Project Pegasus, a joint NASA United States Air Force project that Shield also had something to do with that, which we saw, we saw a later stage of that project of the Project Pegasus. We saw a later stage of that in the Avengers, and this project was initially teased in a deleted scene from Iron Man 2. He mentions Projects Goliath, which we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Pegasus, which we saw first in the Avengers and now again in this film, and we still have to see Project Exodus. May or may not have something to do with the mutant population. Getting ahead of myself. So yeah, they go to Project Pegasus, and on the way over, Veers explains how the Skrulls are the bad guys and Kree are these noble warrior heroes of the cosmos. Fury says how war is a universal language, and he knows a rogue soldier when he sees one, correctly deducing that Veers has gone rogue and disobeyed direct orders from her commander, Jan Rog. Once they reach the Project Pegasus facility, Fury mentions how his full name is Nicholas Joseph Fury, but everyone just calls him Fury. Not Nicholas, not Joseph, not Nick. This adds to the ambiguity and mystery of Nick Fury as a character, since we have Secret Invasion, the Secret Invasion series on the horizon, and we have already seen throughout the MCU numerous people have called him Nick, have called him Director Fury, have called him, I think some people might have called him Fury, but people have called him Nick, people have called him Nicholas throughout the MCU. So that adds to the ambiguity of, like, has Nick Fury been a Skrull this whole time, or so that whole tidbit of information really adds more layers to the character of Nick Fury. So they're met by security, and then they're detained in a holding room. Fury mentions how security around there is definitely not a welcome wagon. Fury then uses his two-way pager, which, again, I grew up in the 21st century. I've seen two-way pagers. I've never actually used them. Never had to use a two-way pager. He uses his two-way pager to alert S.H.I.E.L.D. That the S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Keller, who's the S.H.I.E.L.D. director at this time, that he is with Veers, and he then proceeds to escape from the room with Veers in a similar way to how Scott Lang was able to break into Hank Pym's safe in Ant-Man by getting a fingerprint, by using tape to get a fingerprint and using that on the fingerprint scanner. The two of them, they go down to sub-level 5, which is where all the records are held. They find records on Dr. Wendy Lawson, and Veers discovers that Lawson is in fact a Kree. They also discover that there was a crash 6 years ago that apparently involved Veers and someone named Captain Maria Rambeau. The reason why security around here isn't too friendly is because they're trying to cover up a $1 billion mistake that happened back in 1989, 6 years prior. Director Keller shows up at the facility, and Fury goes to greet him. Keller refers to Fury as Nicholas in the elevator, revealing to all of us that he's a Skrull. As the agents are pursuing Veers, Fury distracts them and ends up fighting Talos, the Skrull, who's posing as Keller. Fury finds Veers, who takes his pager away from him, which he clearly can't be trusted with, and the two of them escape on a S.H.I.E.L.D. quad jet, which Veers knows how to fly. While on the quad jet, which is presumably a precursor to the Quinjets, the S.H.I.E.L.D. Quinjets that we've seen throughout the MCU, quad jet probably having 4 engines, Quinjet maybe 5 engines. They realize that they have a stowaway, Goose the cat, on board, who we saw earlier outside the records room. Goose, of course, referring to Maverick's best friend in Top Gun, the sidekick from Top Gun, Goose. Although in the comics his name was Chewie, a reference to Star Wars, Han Solo, Han, Chewie, but in the MCU his name is Goose. The two of them, along with Goose, they fly over to Captain Maria Rambeau's house in Louisiana. On the way over, Nick Fury, he mentions how they have both gone rogue, how Veers has disobeyed a direct order from her commander, Jan Rog, and Fury has pretty much abandoned his boss, Director Keller. He was supposed to turn over Veers, but the two of them are both gone AWOL, and Veers says, "I won't tell your boss if you don't tell mine." Fury says how, disobeying orders from time to time, it's what keeps us human. Upon arrival at Captain Rambeau's house, Veers is met with shock by Maria and her daughter Monica, who thought that she had died in the accident 6 years prior. Veers reveals her powers to Maria and Monica, and Maria tells Veers about the morning of the flight. Veers realizes that she did have a life on Earth before her life on Hala, and that her real name is Carol Danvers, and the Kree have been lying to her this whole time. Just then, Talos shows up, this time as himself, drinking out of a cup similar to the cup we saw Samuel L. Jackson drinking out of in Pulp Fiction. Not sure if the directors intended on that or not. Talos explains how his people, the Skrulls, are all simply refugees looking for a permanent home, and the Kree have been slaughtering his people for generations. Talos also reveals that Goose the cat is actually a Flurkin. Like, he's able to detect that Goose is a Flurkin, and he's just really just scared of Goose. And then they even kind of like Carol kind of picks up Goose and like kind of presents it to him. It's like, get that thing away from me. Flurkin is an alien being that contains other pocket universes and pocket dimensions inside of itself. Talos shows the three of them the black box recording from the crash back in 1989. The audio file is put into Maria's home computer and then takes a minute to load because, again, it is a 90s computer. The file loads and they hear the audio from the crash, and we even get a flashback sequence. During the flashback sequence, we see how Danvers and Rambo were on a flight that morning, and Danvers originally wasn't even going to fly that day, but she said if lives were at stake, then she would go up. Danvers flies into outer space with Dr. Wendy Lawson in an attempt to help the Skrulls, and this ends with the two of them getting shot down and crashing back to Earth. Shot down by a Kree, by Kree forces, and crashing back onto Earth. They both survive the crash, and Dr. Lawson reveals how her real name is Mar-Vell, and she's a Kree from the planet Hala, and for years she has been on the wrong side of an unjust war, and her work on creating a light-speed engine was in an effort to end the war between the Kree and the Skrulls. The two of them are attacked by the Kree, and Dr. Lawson is killed. Carol shoots the plane's engine, which was powered by the Tesseract, aka the Space Stone, and absorbs its power. So Carol does get her powers from an Infinity Stone. Danvers is then taken by the Kree and given the name Veers, which was the only part of her dog tag that the Kree were able to salvage, and they also wiped her mind so that she wouldn't remember her life on Earth. Upon this realization, Talos reveals how the ship, which his people have been hiding on, is still out there somewhere in space. They're able to track the ship's energy signature and find it in orbit. Well, track the energy signature of the Tesseract, which powered the Lightspeed engine to begin with. Danvers, Fury, Rambo, Goose, and Talos all fly up to the ship using the SHIELD quadjet, which is not designed for space travel. And Talos even mentions how theoretically, like, it would take practice, but all of the Skrulls, they can shapeshift into literally anyone. And Captain Rambo even asks, like, could you turn into a filing cabinet? And Talos is like, why would I want to turn into a filing cabinet? It's like, so the banter in this movie is really, really, really fun. And they decloak the ship and board it. Talos finds his wife and son along with their entire tribe of Skrulls on the ship, and Talos' son has even set a high score on the pinball machine. Fury says how, I bet if I played the same pinball machine for 6 years, I'd have a couple high scores. The ship's engine is powered by the Tesseract, which they hide inside a Happy Days lunchbox. They're all apprehended by Jan Rog and the other Kree soldiers who imprison the Skrulls, and they send Carol to commune with the Supreme Intelligence while everyone's been apprehended by the Kree, by Jan Rog and his Kree soldiers. Carol goes and communes with the Supreme Intelligence with an inhibitor chip attached to her. While she is communing with the Supreme Intelligence, she hears the song Come As You Are by Nirvana, as she is greeted by the Supreme Intelligence in the form of Dr. Lawson, but with green eyes instead of blue eyes. Lawson's eyes were actually blue. The Supreme Intelligence tries to manipulate Carol by showing her past memories of times that she was knocked down. Carol then points out how no matter how many times she was knocked down, even before she had her superpowers, she always got back up again. Carol fights the Supreme Intelligence and escapes from, well, fights while being subdued, while communing with the Supreme Intelligence, fights the Supreme Intelligence in her subconscious, and escapes from the other Kree soldiers while unleashing her full powers and breaking that inhibitor chip. Fury and Rambo are freed from the Kree by Danvers, who takes the lunchbox with the line, "Leave the lunchbox, take the Tesseract." A callback to the famous line, which was improvised. It was the improvised line from The Godfather: "Leave the gun, take the cannoli." The Tesseract is swallowed by Goose, who later helps Fury and Rambo fight the Kree soldiers. And Talos then disguises himself as a Kree and as Goose. And then Fury tries to launch Goose at the Kree, but then Goose is able to pick up Talos' scent, so he knows that that's not an actual Kree, and that's Talos. So Talos, disguising himself as a Kree, pretends to apprehend the two of them, but instead ends up leading them back to the Quadjet. Meanwhile, Carol is still fighting off the Kree soldiers while holding the lunchbox. She fights off Jan Rog and his team, and they realize that she doesn't even have the Tesseract. They take the fight to space as Ronan and the Accusers join the fight. Ronan tries to fire missiles at Earth, and Carol is able to push one of them back and blow up all the missiles before they even reach the Earth's surface. Danvers goes binary, and she destroys the entire Kree fleet. Back on the Quadjet, Fury and Captain Rambo engage in an Independence Day style dogfight with a Kree ship, and Goose scratches Fury's left eye. This is how Fury lost his eye. It's a great space battle scene that I recommend you guys check out yourselves. Jan Rog faces off against Carol in the desert as he says how he is, quote, so proud of her. Carol overpowers Jan Rog, puts him in a ship bound for Hala with a message for the Supreme Intelligence. Carol says, "You tell the Supreme Intelligence I'm coming back to Hala to end it all. The lies, the war, the whole big sham." Back at Captain Rambo's house, the Skrulls have one last meal together with their new friends from Earth. Fury suggests that Carol take on the name of Captain Marvel, as he refers to the music group the Marvelettes. Carol has now upgraded Fury's pager to have unlimited range in the universe, and Carol says to use it to contact him only in emergencies. Carol then flies off into space to help the Skrulls find a permanent home away from the Kree and without danger. In the final scene of the film, we see Fury sitting at his office computer, drafting a proposal for what he initially refers to as the Protector Initiative. This is his initiative to have a response team to protect the Earth from any future extraterrestrial threats, of which there are an unknown amount of in the universe. Fury then sees a photo of Danvers' fighter jet and sees how her call sign was Avenger. As a way of paying homage to Carol, he renames the initiative the Avengers Initiative. As the Avengers theme plays in the background, and then the credits roll, the film ends as the credits roll, and we get two post-credit scenes. The first one shows Nick Fury's pager with the Captain Marvel insignia, which we saw at the very end in the post-credit scene of Infinity War, as Captain Marvel then shows up to the Avengers HQ and asks the Avengers, "Where's Fury?" And then the scene ends. Which apparently, according to Brie Larson, that was the very first scene that she had even shot. Like that was her first time on set with any Marvel characters. She didn't even know who she would be saying that line to. Like, she just showed up to set and asked, "Where's Fury?" It was just her, a green screen. That was it. Second post-credit scene shows that Goose throws up the Tesseract onto Nick Fury's desk. So, I mean, I get that this movie takes place in the in-between period, like after Captain America, the First Avenger. Like, we saw Howard Stark retrieve the Tesseract on his way as they were searching for Captain America. And I guess at some point, Howard gave the Tesseract to Dr. Lawson for them to experiment on. And now it's back in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s hands. So, and that was the second post-credit scene. This movie emphasizes the theme of self discovery and living up to one's full potential. Danvers was lied to by the Kree and told that her powers were given to her by the Kree and that they could be taken away from her. Her true memories were hidden from her as she was fed lies. After returning to Earth, she realized who she really was and unlocked her true power and her true potential, and realized the truth about the unjust genocide, pretty much, that the Kree were doing to the Skrulls, who were really just refugees looking for a home. The film served as an MCU prequel of sorts, taking place, like I said, 50 years after Captain America: The First Avenger, which ended around the year 1945, around the end of World War II. So 1995, so 50 years after that, while also about 14 years before the first Iron Man movie, which, as I mentioned in my Iron Man review, the year is not really explicitly stated. It takes place, I want to say, around the year 2009. So, yeah, 1995 to 2009. It's about 14 years. 14 years before the first Iron Man, while also being 50 years after Captain America: The First Avenger. So, Captain Marvel gave us the origin of not only Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel, but also the origin of the Avengers Initiative, the origin of the name Avengers Initiative, and we finally find out how Nick Fury lost his eye. He mentions, like, in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye. So we finally find out, how did Nick Fury lose his eye? The film introduced us to the Skrull, shapeshifters, and the Kree. Well, we were introduced to the Kree in Guardians of the Galaxy, but introduced us to the Kree homeworld of Hala, which we saw a blink and you'll miss it Easter egg for way back in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which came out 2 years before this film. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 came out in 2017. Captain Marvel came out in 2019. We were introduced to Captain Maria Rambeau, as well as her daughter, Monica Rambeau, who is still a child in this film. Monica Rambeau shows up as an adult in the Phase 4 Disney Plus series WandaVision, which is not a part of the Infinity Saga. So we will see more of Maria Rambeau in future MCU projects. We will see Captain Marvel show up in our next film, Avengers Endgame, as she will join the Avengers. Overall, I think that this film was a fun space opera origin story that further expanded the MCU and added to the MCU in ways that we have seen in recent years, and I predict that we will see the real impact of this film when the Secret Invasion miniseries comes out next year, 2023. Overall, I give this movie a solid 6.5 out of 10. Let me know what you guys thought about this film in the comments below. Or hit me up on Instagram, TikTok, or Discord. On to the current nerd news. Off the top, I think that it's only appropriate that I begin this segment by addressing the passing of the man, the myth, the legend. Rest in peace to Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman in numerous animated shows and films over the last 30 years. He will always, always, always be the voice of Batman in my eyes. On the Marvel front, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is now in theaters. I saw it in theaters on Thursday, November 10th, and I had a blast. I saw it in IMAX 3D. I highly recommend that you guys see the movie in theaters and try and see it in IMAX if you can. I think the movie was filmed for IMAX, so I saw it in IMAX 3D. Definitely highly recommend that you see it in theaters. Do not wait for this movie to show up on Disney Plus. It is meant to be experienced in theaters. My non-spoiler review is coming soon for Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. It is the official end of Phase 4. There's a bit of an asterisk next to that statement because it's the last film of Phase 4, but I was also informed that Secret Invasion is also going to be a part of Phase 4, but it's going to be partially Phase 4 and partially Phase 5. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is going to be the kickoff of Phase 5, and I'm super excited for this film, super excited for to see where they're able to go with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. We did get the cameo from. I recently rewatched season 1 of Loki. We got the cameo of Jonathan Majors as He Who Remains, a variant of Kang the Conqueror, on the season finale of Loki. So I'm definitely looking forward to Kang the Conqueror and like his involvement in the MCU going forward. Who knows? Maybe the TVA exists inside the quantum realm. We got Secret Invasion, we got Thunderbolts, we got the Marvels, we got Captain America, New World Order, and so much more. Cobb's Corner, we will be covering all the upcoming Marvel shows and movies. We are not going anywhere. I promise you guys, we are going to be covering all of it. I'm going to do my best to start talking about TV shows as well, not just movies. On the DC front, James Gunn has recently teased an upcoming Mr. Terrific film. Mr. Terrific is a superhero whose superpower is essentially that he is insanely smart and can learn things very fast. I would love to see this character, who I had never heard of before James Gunn's tweet, be brought into the DC EU. DC has an exciting future as well. I think Marvel, the thing about, Marvel and DC, like they've always been rivals, even like before the DCEU, before the MCU. They've always been rivals in the world of comics and the world of entertainment. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they've got a past. We had the Infinity Saga, like all these movies I'm reviewing. This is Marvel's past. And, Marvel, they're not the new kids on the block anymore. I think the DCEU, they had a shaky start, as I mentioned in previous episodes. But they are making a comeback. They are hitting the ground running. And I'd love to see another studio. I'd love to see Warner Bros. Studios do the exact same thing that Marvel was able to do. Now that the Infinity Saga is over, Marvel, they've got a future, but they've also got a past. And DC has a bright future. They don't have much of a past. They're still relatively new. Like the DCEU has only existed 9 years, like since 2013, Man of Steel, and in those 9 years, they haven't really released as many films as Marvel had released between 2008 and 2017. So I think DC's definitely got an exciting future. I'm going to be covering more DC content in future episodes. I feel like this podcast has been mainly Marvel content. I do promise to break into both DC and Star Wars content as well, and also I'd also like to review and discuss the Sony Marvel universe, because Sony is really playing their hand at a shared universe of Marvel superheroes. I liked Venom. Loved it. The first one. Venom 2, Venom Let There Be Carnage was all right. Not as good as the first one. Morbius was okay. I mean, and now there's Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter is coming, so that's going to be exciting. But yeah, back to DC. They've got an exciting future. If you haven't seen Black Adam, definitely go see it. They've got upcoming films: The Flash, Shazam: Fury of the Gods, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. In the new year, I do plan to cover more DC content. And it's like I said, DC, they have a very, very exciting future ahead, as does the Sony Marvel universe. Marvel has a future as well as a past. DC and Sony, they've got futures. If you like this kind of content and enjoy talking about movies and TV shows as much as I do, and you would like to be featured on an episode of Cobb's Corner, then all you have to do is send me a message on Instagram, TikTok, or on Discord, and maybe you will be featured in a future episode. All those links are in the show notes below. I was recently featured on an episode of the Lights Camera Rant podcast. I will leave a link to that episode in the show notes below. Check it out. I had a blast. I had a lot of fun being a guest on Lights Camera Rant podcast. We talked about a lot of stuff was talked about. Episode's about an hour and 24 minutes, so definitely check out that episode. You can find it on YouTube, and it's available on all podcast listening platforms. I will leave a link to that. Leave a link to that episode in the show notes. I will also leave a link to the episode of Backlook Cinema podcast, which I was featured on back in either September or October. So check out that episode if you have not already. It was episode 90 of Backlook Cinema, where we reviewed the film Rocky. So I have been featured on both those podcasts. If you yourself would like to be featured on an episode of Cobb's Corner, like I said, just hit me up on Instagram, TikTok, or Discord. Or if there's another podcast that you would like me to be featured on, or you'd like them to be featured on my podcast, let me know. Let me know who you guys want to hear on Cobb's Corner. If you enjoyed this episode and you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like this episode, give us a good rating wherever you're listening from. Thank you for listening to the very end. Subscribe to this podcast and turn on your post notifications because I drop a new episode Fridays at 10 a.m. That's U.S. Eastern Standard Time. That's East Coast of the United States, 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time, and you do not want to miss out. I will talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.